Hello and welcome back to the Sports Report with me, Marco Hernandez. A lot has happened since the last time I made a pod, and I think the last time I made a podcast was when Justin Fields had just been traded. And even then, that was a little bit late from when Justin Fields actually got traded. But a lot has happened since then. We had the NFL draft that came in, which I kind of talked about a little bit in that podcast, if I do remember. We have the NBA playoffs going on. The first round had just concluded just recently as I'm recording this, and also we have some baseball talk, some baseball news that have as circus that have surfaced since that last podcast. So, like I said, we have a lot to get into, and what better way to start than talking about the NFL draft? And that is Caleb Williams being number one overall pick to the Chicago Bears, as I predicted, as I'm sure everybody thought was going to be the case going into the draft. And now, going into the draft, and I'm so happy. Let me just say once. I am so happy that we had a number 9 overall pick because it would have been boring just knowing that Caleb Williams would have been the number 1 overall pick. Not boring necessarily because obviously we have the chance at a franchise quarterback that this franchise, the Chicago Bears, have just frankly never had in their career or in their lifespan of the Chicago Bears, and never had a franchise quarterback. But it was kind of a foregone conclusion that it was going to happen already. So it wasn't necessarily that big of a deal. I feel like the excitement was still there, even though we knew that Caleb Williams was going to be drafted number 1. But having the number 9 overall pick, I think, helped so much throughout the night as well because it added more suspense to the night as a Bears fan. That night went down with some surprise. Obviously, like I said, the number 1 overall pick was the Caleb Williams. Number 2 was Jaden Daniels. 3 was Drake May, which was pretty, I think, expected. I think the night went overall pretty smoothly. From most people's estimations, number 4 was Marvin Harrison Jr. So he went the first wide receiver off the board. You had number 5, Joe Alt, go to the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh gets his offensive tackle to pair with Justin Herbert there in Los Angeles. And then at 6, you have Malik Neighbors, where you start thinking maybe some trade ups, maybe potentially. But we didn't get any trade ups into the top 10. Apart from which I'll get into. 7, the Titans, they ended up taking J.C. Latham. At number 8, the Falcons, with probably the biggest surprise, was Michael Penix Jr. After giving Kirk Cousins that 4-year, $180 million contract, they go and decide to draft a quarterback with their number 8 overall pick, although they have a very glaring need in defense for a defensive end. They decide to go quarterback of the future. And then at number 9, the pick that I think a lot of people in Chicago wanted, a lot of people projected, and it was a wide receiver out of Washington, Rome Odunze. And I have been talking about Rome Odunze for so very long, and I've loved his game outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., which was obviously the number one overall wide receiver in this draft, which is a very stacked wide receiver class. Malik Neighbors was mocked for a long time as number 2, but I've always preferred Rome Odunze. I preferred his game over Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is much more of a catch, and he can go 80 yards if he wants. Catch a short 10-yard route and then go 80 yards with it. He is a lot more explosive than Rome Odunze, but I don't think that's what we need necessarily in this offense. Rome Odunze is a lot more polished. He's a lot better. I wouldn't say he's a lot better at high pointing the football. I think they're both very good at that. But I think Rome Odunze is a much better route runner, a polished route runner, and someone that is going to fit this offense here in Chicago much better than what Malik Neighbors would have been. Because he can play out in the slot. He can play as an outside receiver. And with Keenan Allen now there in the mold, and DJ Moore, what an opportunity to learn from 2 veteran wide receivers. One's going to be a Hall of Fame. One is a current Pro Bowler, an All-Pro, and DJ Moore. how would you not love that opportunity to learn from those two wide receivers? And in a situation now where Caleb Williams comes in with those three wide receivers, in addition to Cole Kmet, in addition to Gerald Everett, in addition to adding DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, and you still have Khalil Herbert, you still have Roshan Johnson. You hope that the offensive line can continue to progress with Darnell Wright, Braxton Jones. You get a couple. You get two centers that are Ryan Bates and another one that is escaping my mind at the moment. Still have Tevin Jenkins. That you hope that Nate Davis can stay healthy for a long enough period of time to really see if he is a guard for you. But I think this situation for Caleb Williams, a lot of people are saying, and I think as well, is probably the best the situation a rookie quarterback can walk into. You have two all-pro wide receivers, one being a veteran wide receiver that is going to be going to the Hall of Fame, and you add in another wide receiver from the draft class that you already have some kind of connection and some rapport with, and you add that with DJ Moore, and you have a completely different offense, and what an offense that this franchise has never seen before. The amount of talent in that offensive huddle is probably, like I said, the most talented offensive huddle that the Chicago Bears have ever had in their franchise. And it's an amazing opportunity for someone like the number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams, to walk in and have a CJ Stroud type rookie season. And I'm not expecting necessarily a CJ Stroud type season, but you're hoping for a better season than we've had in the last 3 years at that quarterback position. And you hope that it's a significant upgrade. And if you're Ryan Poles, you wouldn't make the change from Justin Fields to having Caleb Williams if you didn't believe that was a significant upgrade. And that's just the fact. And I think Ryan Poles, he has done a very, very good job throughout this process of understanding of, hey, look, we knew, he said it himself, he knew Justin Fields was not going to be the guy moving forward by the end of the season. And he decided we're going to move on from him. Very early on in this process, he's decided that he's going to move on from Justin Fields. Now it's about selecting the right quarterback. You have the number 1 overall pick. As soon as the season ends, you have the number 1 overall pick, and you have these 2, 3, 4 months to plan and look and scout and understand who is going to be that quarterback for you in the future. They could have gone Jaden Daniels. They could have gone Drake May. They could have gone any one of these dudes, but they ultimately decided on Caleb Williams because they love the tape. Ryan Poles has constantly raved about Caleb Williams as an athlete, as a passer, as if just playing from the quarterback position. But he raved so much about just his character, and that's what Caleb Williams' character has become a huge talking point and a huge discussion over the last couple of months. Whether or not he is the football guy, whether or not he wants to be in Chicago, whether or not he is a good teammate, if he's a diva or anything like that. And Caleb Williams has answered all of those questions, especially to Ryan Poles. The most important person in all of this and all of the decision making was Ryan Poles. And he went through the process of, he understood that the tape was a tape, and he understood what Caleb Williams looked and his potential and what he could be in the NFL, just purely as a quarterback, purely from the pocket. But understanding and wanting to know who Caleb Williams was, his character, his family, and everything like that, this dude loves ball. He loves football. And I think it's completely apparent that he wants to win. You see how many interviews he has done. He's done so many interviews over the last couple of weeks leading up to the draft and since being drafted about he wants to win, and he hopes that Chicago is ready for a winner. And I don't know if I'm going to say this now. I don't know if Chicago's ready for this. I don't know if the city, the fan base necessarily is ready for this type of character, because Caleb Williams is probably the most famous athlete that has ever come into Chicago out the gate. Like, there hasn't been a person this famous or this well known coming into the city before he even comes. Like, Derrick Rose was a hugely popular player, but a lot of it, and of course because of his run in the NCAA tournament, but also because of just how good he was locally. I think everyone knew who Derrick Rose was, and they understood the hometown kid. Michael Jordan was very, very known around the nation because of what he did at UNC, and then he came to Chicago, but he then became this global superstar. He became this extremely famous person. Caleb Williams, around at least nationally, he is so well known and so famous, and he already has a ton of money. He's already a millionaire, and it's going to be interesting to see how this fan base creates a a relationship with Caleb Williams. And it's the beginning of a new generation of athlete. And whether or not this fan base can accept him painting his nails and being as eccentric as he is and being as outside of normacy, I guess, what people usually thought was normal, and especially with quarterbacks, he is the complete opposite of that. And I believe that being accepting of that and understanding that he is going to be who he is and he is unapologetically him. And that is all we could pretty much ask for from anybody. And I think he is prepared. I think he is ready for the challenge. And man, it's gonna be fun. I just want this to start. I really just want preseason to come. I want just to see him on the field already, to finally go through the growing pains, because I understand, and I think most of the fan base understands, that there's going to be growing pains. It's a rookie. He's coming into the first year. I don't expect us to go out and win the Super Bowl, even though I put a parlay on it. I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm ready. I'm ready, and I think the fan base is, for the most part, ready. There's still a couple people out there, a couple Justin Fields lovers that are still denying this and blah, blah, blah. Just move on, all right? Move on with the rest of us and enjoy this ride. I sure hope it's the last time we have to go through this. So I can go on and on about football, just constantly, over and over. And if you listen to my podcast and if you watched more and more about what I've done over the last couple of months, it has been predominantly football based. And I think for the most part, a lot of that has to do with the intrigue with the Chicago Bears. I think that's just how it's been for me personally. And I'm talking about this because of my um, kind of lack thereof of watching basketball over the last couple of months. I barely watched any preseason, or excuse me, not preseason, regular season basketball. Just I haven't watched really much basketball just because of, I mean, the Bulls have kind of drained my thinking, my love for basketball a little bit. But just because they haven't been important and I haven't really been paying attention as much. But I kind of still have been paying attention and understand and seeing who's good, who is doing well. I still keep up with a lot of those things. But as soon as the playoffs start, I was locked in. I was locked in. I was ready to watch some competitive basketball. No non-defense, no players taking off days or anything like that. And a lot of that has to do with, again, it's the postseason. It's time to lock in for a lot of players. And so far, it's been a very fun, competitive postseason. Apart from some series, the Lakers and the Nuggets ended up going 5. It was, again, just like last season when the Nuggets and the Lakers were met up in the conference finals. It was a sweep, but it was probably the most competitive sweep I've ever seen in my life. And the 5-game series was probably one of the more competitive 5-game series I've seen in my life as well. It took Jamal Murray to get 2 buzzer beaters over Anthony Davis to pull the Nuggets through into the next round. And I say pull because they have labored over the last since the start of the postseason. They have not looked like the champions that were last season. They do not look like the defending champions at the moment. Jamal Murray looks almost not healthy. Jokic looks tired almost. He looks sluggish, and the rest of the role players aren't contributing as much as they did last season in their championship run. And I will kind of talk about that a little bit more, but kind of recapping more of the postseason. I didn't really watch much. I didn't watch 1 minute of Cleveland and Orlando. I thought that was one of the most pointless. Obviously, it's not pointless because for those fan bases, is very important. And Orlando being in the playoffs again and taking Cleveland to 7 games is very impressive, especially if you're an Orlando Magic fan. You don't get a lot of these opportunities ever since Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard. So, or Shaq, and then Dwight Howard, and then now. So you just don't get a lot of those opportunities to watch your team in the playoffs. So obviously, I understand if you're an Orlando Magic fan, you're watching every single one of it. But to me, it's a series to see who loses to Boston in the next round. Um, Boston dominated the Miami Heat for the most part without Jimmy Butler. The Thunder swept the Pelicans. The Clippers and the Mavericks went 6 games. I'm pretty sure, right? If memory, I may be wrong. Don't hate me, but I'm pretty sure it went 6, and the Mavericks came up on top. And finally, the Timberwolves swept the Phoenix Suns. And that terrible disaster down there in Phoenix, man. I will get into that a little bit too. Over in the East, the rest of the series in the East, the Pacers and the Bucks. The Pacers took care of the Bucks in 6 without Giannis, without Damian Lillard. They pretty much took care of them. And then the other series was the New York Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers, and a very hurt, very hurt Joel Embiid could not help Tyrese Maxey, and the Knicks eventually took them out. So that brings us now into present day. And let me tell you, the series I wanted to watch the most was the Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets. And I was so excited to watch that series because I believe those were the 2 best teams out in the West. And I think my judgment and my stance at the time was correct, and I still believe that. And I said previously that if those 2 teams, the winner of those 2 teams are going to go, the winner of that series will go to the NBA Finals representing the Western Conference. And I thought it was going to be the Nuggets in 7. I'm going to have to stick with that because Denver was also part of that parlay that I put with the Chicago Bears. I'm just going to have to go with it. But I'm scared for the Nuggets. There isn't really much to say about them. The Minnesota Timberwolves came into the postseason as a number 1 ranked defense in the NBA. And it has showed over this postseason. Anthony Edwards has fully arrived this season, and the defense that they have played. When I was watching Game 2, Game 1 was very entertaining. It was back and forth. Both teams were hitting good shot after shot. Jamal Murray came alive in the second half. A lot of the Denver Nuggets have come alive in the second half because they have started off very slowly. And when I said they have labored through this playoff so far, you could labor through and come back from deficits against the Los Angeles Lakers. You cannot do that against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and you could see that in the first 2 games that they could go in. They've gone in holes, and Game 1 they managed to come back, but they still lost. In Game 2 they got destroyed, and they got destroyed defensively. On the defensive side of the ball, Minnesota are elite at creating turnovers and making you work for every basket that if you make a basket, you are working 100% and you deserve to make that bucket because it's probably a difficult shot. And I think Nikola Jokic has seen that because they throw body after body after body at you, and you're not able to create any separation. And if you're Jamal Murray, you're being smothered every time because at 1 minute it's Mike Conley, then next one is Nickeil Alexander, then the next minute it's Jaden McDaniels, and you just have all of these dudes swarming long-armed defenders that you just can't get around, and then eventually you get frustrated. And that's what Denver ultimately did. They got frustrated in that second game, and they were looking for calls, and they almost got Jamal Murray throwing a heat packet onto the court when he was on the bench. Head coach Mike Malone was going crazy at the referees for missing calls. They are frustrated because they are unable to get off to the starts that they want. They're unable to have any kind of flow on offense, and it just looks difficult. And all the credit in the world to Minnesota. They are forcing Denver into very difficult situations. They could pick you up full court, they could pick you up half court, they could pick you up mid to half court. They have the ability, and they did that without Rudy Gobert, by the way. And it is insane how you could have potentially the defensive player of the year be out and still dominate in the way that they did. All of that in Denver, which is probably one of the biggest home advantages in all of sports just because of the altitude. Now they're going back to Minnesota. They are on the defending champions are on the verge of being swept. The MVP, who Nikola Jokic, who has just won his third MVP in the last 4 years, is on the verge of being swept. Game 3 and Game 4 is in Minnesota. Game 3 is tomorrow night. As I'm recording this, it's Thursday. It is tomorrow night. And Jamal Murray, thankfully, did not get suspended, which I completely thought. I was so glad, honestly, to not see him be suspended for throwing that heat packet. I understand he did it, and it was in the heat of the moment. You can't do it. I'm not defending him. He cannot do that. It is very dangerous. Karl Anthony Towns was very close to stepping on it, and you never know. He could have rolled an ankle. He could have been hurt. He could have been injured. But I'm glad that they didn't they didn't impact the outcome of what Game 3 was. It's going to be difficult for Denver already to go into Minnesota with a very electric crowd, because that crowd has not seen a second round playoff since Kevin Garnett. I don't even know. Did they even make? I don't even know. I don't even know. That crowd's going to be rocking in Minnesota. It's going to be difficult for Denver to go into Minnesota and win one. They have to capture probably 2 or both to really turn the series around, and you just can't see it. And if they didn't have Jamal Murray, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that this is going to be a sweep. So that's, man, and it's going to be tough for Denver. The other series in the West, you have the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks. And boy, I thought Dallas would win in 6. And I still believe Dallas will win in 6. But that Oklahoma City Thunder team, I didn't watch a lot of them. Like I said, I barely watched any regular season basketball. But of what I've seen so far in this playoffs, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can do whatever he wants against anybody on that Denver team. Who's going to stop Shai? You could say arguably who's going to stop Luka as well. But that team is so centered around what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does, because he can do anything he wants. He can get to the paint whenever he wants, and he has a ton of ability to finish against the biggest defenders, against Daniel Gafford, against Derek Lively. So it's going to be a very, very difficult series for Dallas. Like I said, I still think Dallas will win in 6. I think Luka and Kyrie will prevail. But I'm trying to think of when Game 2 is. They just played recently. I think Game 2 might be tonight. So we're going to see. Out in the East, I think, again, it's a foregone conclusion. I said it earlier that whoever won that Orlando and Cleveland matchup was going to lose to Boston, and Boston came out in Game 1 winning by 25 points. I still think Boston's going to drop a game, maybe even 2. Cleveland, I think Donovan Mitchell will get you 1. They'll get you 1. I don't know if he's good enough to get you 2 against that Boston team. But I think Boston they're definitely capable of dropping 1. I don't think they're going to sweep. I say Boston in 5. There's not much to that series, honestly. But probably the most intriguing series is I thought it was going to be Denver and Minnesota, but now it's going to be looking like Indiana Pacers versus the New York Knicks. And those first 2 games have been very close, and I think Indiana could have won both those games. Purely the fact that New York are dealing with a lot of injuries. Now, potentially, OG Anunoby could miss some time. Jalen Brunson looks hurt. They are without Mitchell Robinson. They're without Julius Randle. They're dealing with a couple of injuries to their key players. And I think Indiana can pounce on that. Tyrese Halliburton has not looked aggressive enough for me over the last 2 games. Um, specifically, end game. I think he's deferring too much to like someone like Pascal Siakam, who has been in deep playoff runs and is an NBA champion. I think he needs to be more aggressive going into it. And I said it before that I think the Indiana Pacers will be beaten by any decent team that can defend and healthy. Of course, the New York Knicks are one of the better defensive teams. Jalen Brunson is one of the better players, but health has compromised the New York Knicks. And going into Game 3, going back to Indiana with a question mark surrounding OG Anunoby's health, a question mark surrounding Jalen Brunson's health. How much can the New York Knicks kind of hold out until they're healthy? And it's going to be very interesting. I think it will end up going. I guess if Brunson misses a game and Anunoby misses some time, like 2 or 3 games, or maybe the entire rest of the series, this could go 7. And I still think the Knicks will win, but it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be very, very tough if you're the New York Knicks to come out of that series with all the injuries that they have sustained. So yeah, that's pretty much been. I'm looking forward to the playoffs, man. I think it's been fun. I think we have entered a new era, and we're in a crossroads in the NBA. We have entered a fork in the road. Where will the NBA go over the next 10 years, over the next decade? Who will lead it? Who will be the leaders of this next generation, of this new era of basketball, of this modern game? LeBron James is home. Stephen Curry didn't make the playoffs. Kevin Durant got swept. That era of basketball, it's pretty much done. I don't see them going, any one of those players going any kind of long run unless they pair up with one of these younger guys. And it's unfortunate to see, but it's what happens. We are going through a transition period, and it's probably the first transition period of my fandom. I kind of was growing up watching basketball during the when Kobe had just finished with his back-to-back with the Lakers, his second back-to-back, and then the Heatles for him. So that was kind of my early basketball viewing and fandom. So all I've known really has been Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and Stephen Curry. So it's going to be interesting to see who are going to be the next generation, the new superstars, and I think you can kind of tell who it's going to be. I mean, like I said, Jokic has just won his 3rd MVP in 4 years. Anthony Edwards seems locked in to be one of the faces in the NBA, maybe the face of the NBA. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who just finished 2nd in MVP voting and is only 25, 26 years old. And then you have the Boston Celtics out in the East. You have a lot of good talent and a lot of good young talent, and it's going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the playoffs. But we cannot stop there, because I have a gripe. I have a very, very big gripe, and as I look at my Apple Watch right now, and I look at a tweet by Adrian Wojnarowski that says Mike Budenholzer is emerging as a frontrunner to be the next coach of the Phoenix Suns, who have just fired Frank Vogel a couple minutes ago, or maybe like an hour ago when recording this. And this is my problem with the NBA, and my problem with, it's mainly the NBA. I feel like that's the only sport that I closely follow that goes through this kind of thing. That the coach gets scapegoated the most, and it's part of it's a what's the word? Is a product of just the players making so much money now. And the players have the power. So what organizations are going to do, they're going to try to get more from their investment. They're paying so much to these players that they don't want to just get rid of the players. They have to get rid of what is the easiest option to get rid of, and that is the head coach. And we have seen so much. Just recently, Darvin Ham gets fired. Frank Vogel has not been fired. And there's going to be more head coaches to be fired. People were already asking for Doc Rivers' job to be fired, and he just got in half the season. And the Bucks didn't give Adrian Griffin enough time. They gave him 30, 40 games, not even, to coach, and then got rid of him and eventually went to Doc Rivers. So the coaching in this league is so this is the most scapegoated sport. Players do not hold enough accountability for me in this league, in the NBA. And that's been a problem recently. I think it's always been a problem, especially since the players have gotten more and more power. And I think the problem is with these organizations is not building and just going through a process. I talked about it's similar to with like the Chicago Bears and Ryan Poles. Fan bases, not just NBA, but just in general, sport fan bases are not stupid. We understand the hardships and what has to be done in order to win successfully in any sport, whether that is going out and rebuilding. Like, all right, we're gonna completely tear it down. We're gonna go and draft some young players. We're gonna rebuild, and then we're gonna do it that way, a la look at the young players now. Minnesota, OKC. Look at how they have built their rosters with young talent. They have drafted very, very well. You look at Phoenix, who have they had Devin Booker. They drafted really well. They had a good team. They made it to the NBA Finals with Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges. They had a very, very good roster, and they decided to blow it all up. They traded away Chris Paul. They traded away DeAndre Ayton. They trade away Mikal Bridges to get Kevin Durant, and then they trade away the rest of any kind of depth or draft capital that they had in the future for Bradley Beal. And now they have formed a big three in Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant that barely even played, and they got swept. And what do they do? The GM, the owner that compiled this roster and thought Frank Vogel's going to be the guy as a head coach, he goes out after one season. And this is my problem so many times with organizations, is that GMs and presidents of those organizations that are like in charge of the sporting aspect, not any of the financial stuff like that or like the commercial stuff, but in charge of what is going on the field, on the court, do not get enough accountability for me in any of these sports, and specifically in the NBA. There just isn't enough. And they just scapegoat coach. They get coach after coach after coach and assign the same players over and over and over again and think that it's going to work when in reality we're done with super teams. Look at there aren't any super teams in the NBA right now. Aside, you could say the Boston Celtics, but they built that up through the draft. They drafted Jason Tatum. They drafted Jaylen Brown. They made good trades to bring in Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday and Derek White, and they have built that because of what they have done in the draft. And their two main stars are from the draft. They don't go out and trade away their entire depth and all their roster and all their draft picks to go get a superstar. Look at OKC, or excuse me, now OKC. Who kind of tied in with OKC. Look at the LA Clippers, who traded away Danilo Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and 6 first-round picks for Paul George, and they've made it to the conference finals one time, and they haven't had a postseason where Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have been healthy in a postseason run at all. And now look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who has just finished second in MVP voting and is on the verge of potentially leading I think the second youngest roster in the NBA to the conference finals. It's just the fact of how you build rosters. And it's so irritating how when just organizations can just get all of this capital and then just trade it all away for 2 guys, 3 guys, and think that they could just put a Band-Aid over the rest of the roster when that just isn't the case anymore. And my problem, and I'm talking so much about this because I have so many issues with like this team right here about building and rosters, and there's just so much I don't even know. I can't even speak. There's so much just frustration with me and like roster building and process. Like I said, fans are not stupid. They can understand when a process is being done right. Look at the Chicago Bears. A process has been done correctly and thoroughly. And when that process is done correctly and thoroughly, we will understand. And if something doesn't work out, then ultimately you were wrong, and it's fine. Okay, we're not gonna hate you for it, but when you're throwing everything away, you're throwing a future away for something that we know automatically is not going to work. I knew exactly that Phoenix Suns organization was not going to work. We knew Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker was never going to work. And how that fan base in Phoenix even thought, or maybe they didn't even think that, or how the organization thought that that was going to work, it just blows my mind. It truly does. And I'm just going on a rant because I talk about like I said, going through processes. The process over there in Philadelphia, you see how that worked out. We could talk about tanking for so many years and then they got so many first round picks. I mean, they had Ben Simmons, they had Joel Embiid, they drafted Jahlil Okafor, and they had, was it Jahlil Okafor? I think so. They had so many other Markelle Fultz. They just drafted poorly, and that was the problem over there in Philadelphia. The process works because eventually they did get Joel Embiid. They got a superstar. They just did it very poorly. I'm wearing a Southside jersey. I'm wearing a baseball jersey. I'm not really a huge baseball guy. I wouldn't really necessarily say I'm that in tune with baseball, but the amount of just, I would say I'm getting more into it. I'm understanding more. I've always kept up with what is going on, and I understand the rules and everything. I understand the game, and I got really into it around 2019 when the White Sox got good, and I kind of kept it understanding and knowing and learning more about the game, and I've liked the game more and more and more. And I know that baseball is going through a little bit of a down period. They've been constantly going down in viewership and attendance and everything like that. Um, but I've enjoyed the game. It's weird because for a lot of national audience and a lot of in general, there has been a decline in interest in baseball overall, while my interest has kind of gone up, which is very, very weird. Um, but man, it's hard to be interested when your favorite team is probably one of the worst franchises in all of sports. In all of sports, I'm not even kidding. In all of sports, um, and it stems pretty much from the top. Um, I can name you. I 2 years ago I can name you everyone on that roster on the in the White Sox roster. This year I could name you 7 people, and I could probably name those 7 people right now. You got Luis Robert, you got Garrett Crochet, Michael Kopech, Yohan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, Andrew Vaughn, Martin Maldonado. That's pretty much it. Like I can't like, and I think that's not because of my lack of knowledge of baseball, because I can name a lot of baseball players. That is just how bad the roster is right now. And I understand that we're going through a transit. It's a rebuild. It's the beginning of a rebuild. Chris Getz has come in as a new general manager and said, "I don't like this baseball team. I don't like it. I'm going to trade away everything." They traded away any players that were good. Any like Dylan Cease has now been traded to the Padres, and he's lighting it up in the Padres. This this franchise has been a, you know what? No, we won't talk about it. No, we won't talk about it. No, we won't talk about it because it's not worth. It's just not worth my time. It really isn't. And I came into thinking like, hey, I'm gonna talk baseball. I don't know much. I'm enjoying watching the Cubs. And I don't really like the Cubs, but they have a lot of good things going on despite the injuries to Seiya Suzuki, Cody Bellinger not being 100% healthy. They're losing Justin Steele, who Justin Steele just coming back. Their bullpen has been a massive issue, but their starters have been very, very good, aside from Kyle Hendricks. Kyle Hendricks has not been very good. But Shota, I can't even remember his last name or how to pronounce it, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Signing from Japan this offseason has been very good. He had a very rough first start, if I recall, but he has been overall very good. The trade for Michael Bush, that's the name, Michael Bush. The trade for Michael Bush from the Dodgers, and then retaining Cody Bellinger. They have done really well, and they have a good young players with Christopher Morel, who is starting to light up a couple bats. They have a very good infield with Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner. They have, like I said, a very good starting rotation with pitchers, and they're up and coming team in Chicago, and I'm always down to root for Chicago teams. As much as I'm a White Sox fan, and as much as I don't really like the Cubs, it's good to see a Chicago teams be good. And call me a bandwagon. I'm not really a bandwagon because I'm not really rooting for them. But it's good to see some kind of decent baseball being played here in Chicago, over in the north side. The south side, not so much. It's pretty trash. And we're probably not going to be good for another 7 years. So, I'm going to be honest with that.